Hi, it's Claire Wasserman. Welcome to my podcast, a behind the scenes look at what it really takes to own our worth. I coach real women on how to get what they want at work and in life, as well as a window into my own process as I too figure this stuff out, because it's hard. And so thank you for being here. It's nice to know we're not alone. In this episode, you'll meet Marissa, who is feeling really burnt out from a career in social work and is contemplating a career pivot. I walk her through a series of categories to consider, like her innate strengths and values, the kinds of environments in which she thrives, the impact she wants to have, and things she wants to learn. As I tell her at the beginning of our session, I view getting a job kind of like getting an MBA, where we design our ideal curriculum and then look for an opportunity, or create our own, where we can have the most growth. Just a note for all you listeners, this session has been recorded with her consent and edited for clarity. If you're interested in being coached by me or simply have a question you want answered, go to clairewasserman.com. Okay, let's dive in. Talk to me about what brings you here today and what your goals are in the work that we do together.
Sure. I am by training a clinical social worker. My career has been spent in pretty much in early childhood, child development, and parenting support, primarily in special education and special needs and developmental disabilities. I've been doing this kind of work for about 15 years. I've loved the families. I love the kids. I'm very passionate about it, but I'm also very burnt out and ready to make a change, not just for my own sanity and mental health, but for a different challenge. Have found myself in this kind of niche of the type of work that I'm doing, which has been wonderful, and I've built these skills, but I'm ready to pivot and take a lot of the skills that I've built into a different direction, and particularly can get out of the nonprofit world ideally and see what else is out there.
Before we go into that, I want to ask, how do you currently deal with your stress? Because I do hear you are in an extremely stressful environment. However, I could see you moving into corporate. That's just a different kind of stress. You're exchanging one for another. So to me, it's a little bit more about the practices that you have around it more than anything. So what are you currently to protect your boundaries, your emotional boundaries, your time, energy, etc.?
Yeah, I think the big thing is always just that separation. In this kind of role, it's really hard to have that separation sometimes just because you're working with families, you're working with children, and you take home their stories and you take home the family. So it's a little bit more challenging than I think in some other roles where maybe there has been more separation between that. But a lot of, for me, the stress relief is just through physical activity, through social pursuits, things like travel, friendship activities. I try to find new things that challenge me, activities. I was just traveling and I decided to try sailing for the first time because something I hadn't done. So it was a little bit exhilarating, but also just something physically different.
I love that. Something you should definitely talk about in your LinkedIn as part of your story. That's very special. I would never do that. I would lie down. Really inspired by you. So that was cool. Okay. A ritual that you can do, maybe you're already doing it, but I have found it to be incredibly helpful in terms of releasing somebody else's energy that I was experiencing. So this is really important for anyone listening who interacts with people. So you don't have to be in the nonprofit world or social work or work with kids or families, but if you are, listen up. Wash your hands, okay? And do it in a very methodical, ritualistic way. So after you have that interaction with them, so after, for example, you and I, we have this coaching interaction, I'm going to go to the bathroom and I'm going to just 1 minute meditation. The water, it's coming over my fingers. How do I feel? I'm listening to, you can do all of your senses around this. And you are literally washing away that experience that you had. You were in the moment with them, you connected, you did your best, and it is now over. And I want you to mark it with that ritual. Do you do something like that already?
No, it's interesting because I was reading a book recently that's talking about this closing this loop of the day and the different rituals of things that's similar to what you do. And I've always been thoughtful about what it is that's closing that. And I had a dog previously, I had a dog who passed away, and that my loop was always coming home and cuddling with her. And I think I've been looking for that way to close that. So it's an interesting idea to do that kind of hand washing ritual.
Yeah, because it's physical and easy to do. And it's all about consistency. So you can always do it. Because
Yeah.
in my own work with Ladies Get Paid, I reached a breaking point when I was traveling the country hosting town halls for women to talk about their relationship with money. Woo! We had tears, a lot of tears. And then I was crying. It was just energetically so
Yeah.
intense. So I found that actually game changing for me. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. Okay. So let me talk to you a little bit about my approach in how I look at careers. I don't even look at them like getting a job. I look at them like getting an MBA or a degree. And when you imagine the kind of job that you want, the kind of work that you want to do, it's like creating a curriculum. You also imagine the kind of college you want to go to, right? The environment you want to be in. And then you start doing really creative research and connecting with people. And so that it's not just, oh God, what's on my resume? And I have to apply to an open job. Yikes. That's like really limited. You're going to feel blocked from it and you're going to reach dead ends. So I like to really go into this with an expansive, lack of a better term, growth mindset into this whole what is a career, what is a job. It's about you, your life. What are you learning? What are you gaining out of this? So I'm going to walk you through just a couple of different points that I like to reflect on to help guide me to creating this MBA, this curriculum, this college experience. And the best way for you to answer these things is intuitively. Before I get into that, I want to ask, how are you with your intuition? How connected do you feel to that inner voice? One way to respond to me as you're thinking of how you're going to respond to me is, how do I speak to myself? So for anyone out there listening, going, oh God, what is my inner voice? What is my intuition? Just start with, how do I typically speak to myself? What's the sound of that voice? So for you, what's your response to that?
I definitely do narrate throughout the day. I don't know. I think the sound of it is just, it can sometimes be negative. I think it's harder to keep the positive.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's more of that inner saboteur trying to, that warning sign inner voice
Yeah.
more than the positive.
The reason I'm bringing it up, it is so important for anybody who is trying to figure out the next steps to take in their life. Before you project outwardly, what am I going to do out here? You got to figure out, what are you going to do in here? How do I communicate with myself? Because that's how you're evaluating your choices.
Mm-hmm.
And I would not want you to go down a path that you feel like you, quote, should, okay? Because
Yeah.
some pressurized voice of, you need X, Y, and Z thing that's not really aligned with your deep desires, right? That's going to misguide you.
Yeah.
So, everybody listening who's trying to figure out career path, let's first start with a practice of, how do we connect to the inner voice that is kind, compassionate, calm, curious. There's a bunch of C words, which kind is not one of them. But point being is that inner voice, it will never be negative. So that's a whole other podcast and session based off of how do you discover that voice and build a muscle that taps into it more easily. So just know that's part of your homework for career clarity. It's actually voice clarity. As we go through these exercises, do try to speak from that intuitive place. So something that just feels like it's coming naturally to you and you don't have to overthink it, though, of course, take a moment to reflect. So basically, there are 4 areas that I want to look at that will help us determine a path forward. It's strengths that you get to exercise, it's environments in which you work well in, it's the impact that you like to have, both day-to-day impact and also more globally. And by the way, how will you know if you're making an impact? We're going to talk about that. And then lastly, and this is in line with the MBA ethos, things that you want to learn. Okay. And then I'm going to go into research, how to cast a wide net of creative research that's not reliant on just whatever is an open job description today. So let's start with the strengths that you want to exercise. Okay. Fill in the blank for me here if you can. When you are doing X or thinking of doing X, you feel energized, uplifted, focused, engaged, motivated, connected, alive, content, fulfilled, happy, whatever. If you're not sure how to respond to me in this moment, reflect on a memory you have, okay? Sometime in the past, and it does not need to be work related, and it doesn't need to be recent. So if we want to go way back to childhood, it's probably really accurate, to be honest. So cast a wide net before you respond to me of when you are doing X or thinking of doing X, you feel energized, uplifted, focused, etc.
Okay. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like career related. It's just
Not
like,
at all.
what is that? Yeah.
Because all we're
For
focusing
me,
on are
yeah.
strengths, and how
Oh,
strengths
yeah.
get
Yeah.
exercised and expressed is going to look totally different in
Yeah.
different combinations.
Yeah. I would say then when I am traveling, when I am getting out and exploring, that is when I am the most energized and rearing to go.
Okay. So what's the strength?
I think just this openness and this exploration flexibility, which I don't necessarily always have in my day to day, but for some reason, when I travel,
Hmm.
I allow that flexibility a lot more.
Okay. Openness, exploration. I'm going to continue on with these other questions,
Yeah.
but just for you and everybody listening, anything that you come up with, see if you can go even deeper. So when you say openness, exploration, what does that mean to you? Why does that matter?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we'll try that just as a one little exercise, just to show how you can take a word and unveil another word that gets you even closer to what it is that you mean. So why does exploration, or which one do you want to pick out of those words that you mentioned? Which one would you want to start with?
Let's do openness.
Okay, openness. Okay, as a strength, right? Why does openness matter to you?
I think openness is an option for you're open to change. Openness is the willingness to change, the willingness to grow, not being stagnant.
Mm.
So openness leads to other possibilities.
Okay, so I'll just say right now, willingness to grow, because this is in the category of strength. Would you say one of your strength is growth, is your ability to grow?
Yes.
Okay. So that is, oh, I want to just illustrate that example one more time is when I said, what are some of your strengths? You started with travel. And I said, okay, travel's not really a strength per se. Like
Yeah, yeah.
you're utilizing strengths as you travel. So what would those be? And you said, okay, we have openness, exploration. Great. What is the strength of openness? Or why does it matter to be open? And you were like, it allows you to grow. And I think that's important. Great. So would you say your strength is growth? Yes. So as you were getting very specific with these
Mhm.
words, you're now going to be able to A, show yourself a path forward in which you can use them. And B, it's going to be a story that you tell. I'm sure you can come up with really stellar examples from your past, both work related, but also not work related. So travel, things that demonstrate that you are kick ass at growth, that this is truly a strength of yours. So again, the
Mhm.
more words we can come up with here, the more opportunity you have to find really good examples to tell your story. So
Okay.
those were some first exercises for strengths. Let's talk about
Sure.
environment though. So day-to-day environment and then maybe larger company culture type environment. So reflecting on the past, when have you been able to do your best work? Or going back to the strengths that you mentioned, so maybe not even work related, there are certain conditions that have to be met in order for you to be able to exercise those strengths.
Mhm.
What are those conditions? That is your environment. Those are your ideal environments. Off the bat, can you think of anything?
Yeah, I think an environment that has clear procedures and policies, clear structure to the environment, roles, a clear delineation of what is the word, like the hierarchy of roles, just understanding of that. That's always helpful.
Mm-hmm.
That's been successful, knowing who is in charge of what.
Mm-hmm.
Those have been settings that have been the most successful.
Okay. Quick question on that
Yeah,
front. Not a question, but I want to be like transparent about my own
sure.
process here. When I hear that, you clear roles, structures, who is in charge of what, processes, procedures, things like that. My initial instinct is, oh, she would not enjoy working at a startup. Where rules they're building the plane as they fly it, so to speak. And so in this process of asking ourselves these questions,
Hmm.
ostensibly the purpose is to find clues that can illuminate which direction to go in. Would you say that this now means we are not going to be looking at startup world?
I don't know. I think that's not something I've ever explored, so I don't know enough about it. I think I am looking at it from coming from a place that is not a startup world, but does not have that. And so it's coming from a place of dysfunction that has been established and should have all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that, and having come from somewhere else that was actually more of a startup nonprofit, but did, excuse me, have all of those things in place, having seen the difference. So yeah, I think that's kind of it. So I'm not necessarily opposed to a startup. I think there are lots of ways to implement that and it doesn't have to be perfect.
Yep.
But I guess it's the dysfunction that's more
Mhm.
challenging.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's great. I also think, again, for this exercise, these are now going to be questions that you are able to ask during interviews, right?
Yeah.
So as you are evaluating if this is the right place for you, you'll
Yeah.
now ask a question that will get an answer that shows you the situation you're walking into,
Yeah.
or whatever. So I like to pause as I do these exercises just to show like why I'm asking the question and what I'm using it for. So there's day-to-day environment. So you mentioned something a little more global that would impact your day-to-day. That's fine. What about where you work? Is it with people, not with people? What's like the introvert extrovert balance?
Yeah. Definitely with people. I think I've during COVID, we obviously weren't remote like everyone else, even in a clinical setting, which was really challenging to be remote in that setting.
Mhm.
And I sought out going back in person, even when most people were not, because it was a lot to do remote clinical work. It was too much. I think now I've learned that some kind of a hybrid or flexible where I have time. I like that solitude to get my work done, but I also really thrive around other people. I am more extroverted. So I do like to be in an environment where there are other people to bounce ideas off of or to collaborate with. So maybe that kind of hybrid
Okay.
setup.
Okay, great. Let's talk about impact that you want to have. And then I think most importantly, how will you know if you're having the impact? And one way to answer that question is to actually ask yourself this other question, which comes from Jenny Blake, who wrote a really good book on pivoting. Her question is, if I were to do a TED Talk, the subject would be X.
Ooh,
Yeah, thought that was good.
yeah,
Like legacy
yeah.
stuff, right? What's the legacy you want to leave?
That's a really good question. It's funny because I think if I was looking at my current career versus future, it's hard to think of my current career. I would say TED Talk would be on how to my TED Talk would be on supporting families and kind of challenging world of parenting children with disabilities and how to navigate this complex system of special education and special needs.
Okay, I want to interject for a second because it's
Sure.
really helpful for you and everybody listening. The beginning of the sentence, so you just said a couple of different sentences. The beginning of each sentence is what you want to focus on because the end of the and I'll give you an example. The end of the sentence was specific to what you've done in the past.
Yeah.
Whereas the first part of the sentence indicates what you can do moving forward or indicates
Okay.
a core specialty. So, for example, you said supporting families with empathy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would say supporting others with empathy. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You said something about navigating the complex process of something.
Yeah. Special education and kind of
Take out special
navigating.
education.
Yep. But
You're helping
navigating
people
complex.
navigate a complex process.
Okay.
There was a third, I think there might have been a third thing that you said. So we can continue to do this exercise if you want.
Yeah.
As you're describing all of these things, I want us to be able to then pause and then say, okay, what out of this
Okay.
sentence is too specific or maybe specific is not the right word. I could remove the topic and exchange it with
Mm-hmm.
another topic. But at its
Okay.
core, we're maintaining the function of the sentence. I don't even know
Sure.
if that means that my English is
Yeah.
okay. I say that as if I'm not a native speaker. My English is okay today. So what,
Yeah.
based off of hearing that, is there anything else as you think about the impact that you want to have? Maybe just keep saying things and we can pause and then take out a word or replace a word.
I guess another kind of improving circumstances.
Great. Awesome. The reason I really like doing this exercise is because it demonstrates how so many of the things that we are great at and love doing are transferable. As long as you get to the core of what that thing actually is. So it's not necessarily the people you serve, because you
Mm-hmm.
could serve another group. It's not necessarily when you said helping people navigate the complex system of X, Y, and Z, the act is not necessarily the system. The act, the strength is the ability to navigate the system. So you could potentially be helping another group of people navigate another complex system that looks
Mm-hmm.
entirely different. But again, your strength is that you are able to empathetically guide people through the complexity. Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense?
Yeah.
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 Okay. So these are really good things to begin with for yourself, just to get a handle on what it is you're great at, where you thrive, the impact that you want to have. Quick question though, how will
Sure.
you know that you are making an impact? another way to imagine that is, how do you like to feel at the end of a day or at the end of the week when you're reflecting on the work you've done? How do you know if you can feel good about yourself or not? What do you need to see or experience to feel good?
Hmm. Yeah, I think I don't know that you necessarily see that kind of progress at the end of a week. I think it's more of a long term.
You have to feel it though, because
Yeah,
otherwise you're
you have
going to
to
get
feel,
burnt out.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think just accomplishing one step towards a goal.
Mm,
What, and that could be like one tick off of a to-do list towards something that you're going towards. Because I know a lot of this stuff takes time, especially if we're talking about navigating a complicated process.
mhm.
It's many multiple steps. So if you can get one of those steps done, that's making an impact.
What's your workplace love language? How do you
Yeah.
feel appreciated at work?
Yeah. I think recognition from others of, what I'm doing, from like coworkers.
And then taking a next step further of getting even more specific, what does recognition from coworkers look like?
Thanking me for the work, or I guess utilizing what I've put into place and implementing it further.
Great. And the last question here is things that you want to learn. What are you most curious about? And it could be anything. There's different categories here. So it would be, what are skills that you want to learn? What are groups of people you want to learn about? Processes you want to learn about? Networks you want to grow? There's so
Yeah.
many things that you could learn, so many different categories. If you're having a little bit of a struggle of pinpointing it, which you might not be, but people listening do, you could look at, what are you drawn to when you open your phone? So when you are scrolling through the New York Times, right, are there certain the style section or certain categories of topics that you tend to find yourself more interested in than others? Or where do you spend a lot of time thinking about? What's your Roman Empire, so to speak? Where you're spending a lot of energy, where your attention is currently? There are so many clues within that indicate areas of curiosity for you, that if you were to go towards those direction, you would feel energized. You're scratching that
Yeah.
itch, so to speak. So, what do you have an intuitive sense of what that would be for you?
Yeah. I have a few different things. Like, I think one of the things is project management. I think I do some of that in some aspects, but not in the typical term and what that role means. So understanding that in a larger scale, and those skills, but also financial management and budgetary understanding for different projects, or for companies, for positions that are managing budgets, whether it's grant related or a project, trying to understand that process. So those are two of the big areas that I definitely want to learn more about.
And by the way, just to keep my whole
Yeah.
getting to the core of everything, getting really specific, why does that matter to you? Why do you care?
I want to continue to grow and be able to manage larger projects, larger teams. I've been supervising people before for a number of years, but smaller teams. And I think having those skills will continue to build that ability to manage larger teams, and understanding the bigger picture with budgeting, for example, helps to see the vision and kind of the end product at the larger scale versus the smaller piece. Having coming from the clinical side, I've done a lot of some oversight in community projects and community management, but I've been very micro level in terms of the work.
Mm,
And I'm starting to want to get to this more of a macro sense
cool.
of the work.
I think that's awesome because it's really adding a tool to your toolkit. Because I think ultimately where you're going, we have no idea, and we don't want to know. That would be you going to maybe you want to go to a medium or psychic who was going to tell you how you're going to die, but I don't want to know. So we want to let there be an openness. But how do we make sure that the direction we're going in is right? In my opinion, it's because you are building skills, you are building knowledges, you are building a network. Like, there's just growth in at least one area, if not as many as we can get. So if you feel like that kind of growth is aligned with your values, and we're going to get into an environment that allows you to thrive, amazing, amazing. One thing, though, that you will want to ask anybody that you talk to who is in this kind of role. So when you mentioned project management, I want you to ask them, what is the sacrifice of doing this work? What are the challenges? What's the hardest part about this, both day to day, but also even from a philosophical standpoint? Because my only concern is, this is just for you, when you go from micro to macro, you lose touch with the people, right? Maybe
Hmm.
the interaction now you're having is with your colleagues, and that's fine and good enough, but maybe now you're disconnected from the end customer, or you just can't feel the impact, the legacy in the way that you could before that was very gratifying. And it's not that you don't go in that direction, you just go in the direction with your eyes wide open. So do ask that, what is the sacrifice of doing this kind of work, right? What are the challenges? Now, taking all the things that we just mentioned, right? The strengths, the environments, the impact, things you want to learn, right? You got a whole bunch of data. Okay. It might look a little
Hmm.
confusing right now because we don't know how we're combining the pieces of data to present to you a path. But what I'm looking to do right now is not figure out the path necessarily, but figure out people and companies where these things get expressed. Some combination of them gets expressed. So I'm going to give you just a couple of two prompts that are exercises that might seem a little unrelated to everything that we just did, but taking what you did, having it written down in one place, just knowing that they're pieces of data to remember as you do research means you are making progress on this. So I want to mention that. Here's one of the prompts. Pretend that you are a consultant and think of a favorite brand or organization, something that you've interacted with maybe before that you think is awesome. Want you to imagine, first of all, before you go into it, can you think of one? Imagine that
Oh,
they reached out to you. By the way, if you can't think of anyone right now, that's fine too. It's less
okay.
important about the organization and the brand. What's more important is the problem that you would be solving for them. So I want you to imagine that this company reached out to you and they are just desperate for your help. They are experiencing a serious challenge in their business or a serious problem. By the way, that problem, that challenge, you would have to be excited to work on it. Okay. So this has to be a thing that you're like, yeah, let me roll up my sleeves. And you feel really energized. They come to you and they say, oh my gosh, please, Marissa, we need your help. Can you please send us a proposal? How would you tackle this problem? What would you be doing for us? How do I solve this? We can talk through this exercise. Before we do, I want to explain all the richness that this exercise brings. First, it helps you to identify a company, which is always a good
Mhm.
place to begin when we're doing research. And as after this exercise, I'm going to go into the creative research we can do once you start with the company. How can you amass a whole list of really cool companies for yourself? Because I'd rather us make connections with people at
Mhm.
companies than just looking for open jobs. But first, you're getting this interesting company that represents something that you are aligned with, right? You've maybe interacted with the product before. It
Mhm.
clearly provides a useful thing in your life and or has values that you like. Okay. The next thing I like about this exercise is it is all problem based. That at the end of the day is how we actually sell ourselves into companies. It's not about here, I'm great. It's about here, how do I solve the problems that you have? And here are
Mhm.
examples from my past of how I've solved it beautifully before. Okay. And then you're so compelling in how you solve a problem. They're like, we must hire you. And third, that's the reality of the work that you will be doing. It is problem solving. It is putting out fires. Hence my earlier question of what is the sacrifice that I will have to make to solve this problem? You're experiencing
Mhm.
that right now in your life with social work and nonprofit work, right? Like a very intense, the financial and emotional and probably physical sacrifice or toll that your work takes. And it is largely based around the problems that you solve and, of course, the environment in which you solve it. So, really reflecting on what is the problem that I am super jazzed to solve gets at the crux of what you actually want to do moving forward. Now, again, of course,
Mhm.
how it's expressed, the titles we put on it, project management, etc., the industry, those things, that's all vocabulary we can figure out later. But before we do that, we really want to hone in on the core. I just said a whole bunch of stuff. Tell me what you think first off, based off of this exercise, and then we can dive in as you think of a challenge you'd want to solve for somebody.
Yeah. So I can think of a couple different companies, but it's harder for me. I've started to think almost a little bit about what I foresee myself maybe doing, but I don't necessarily know what companies these kinds of positions exist in. So that's
That's okay.
also
We're not there
a
yet.
little bit.
That's the last
Okay.
stage of our conversation, which will be about the research we do. So
Yeah.
I'm really glad you brought that up because for everybody listening, as a way of literally problem solving, you're going to throw more problems in your way as you work through this. You're going to go, I've never done that before. What's the name of that company? Why would anybody hire me? Great. That means you were trying to solve your problems by first coming up with the problem. Just say, we're not there yet.
Yeah.
Okay. So one foot in front of the other. We just want to focus on what is the actual problem I like to solve. Okay.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
we'll figure out all the rest of it.
Yeah. The thing I like to solve is engagement, like how to get people engaged. And that can be whether it's engaged in the product or the company, or it's employee engagement in something.
Mm.
It's getting people involved and engaged.
Awesome. Awesome. That is so groundbreaking because you've now narrowed down a whole category for yourself. You mentioned a few ways it could be expressed. It's not like that one sentence of how to get people engaged equals just this one job title and that's it.
Yeah.
Which actually would be quite dangerous. If you only came up with something that was just so specific and finite, it would be limiting opportunities for yourself. Okay. I like that it's still broad, but we've now narrowed it down. At least like the window of focus here, we're going in a certain direction, getting people engaged. Who do you want to get engaged? What kinds of people do you want to help? Does it matter to you? And what are you getting them engaged
Yeah.
for?
Yeah. Where I'm starting to wrap my head around is this idea of corporate volunteerism
Mhm.
and social philanthropy. So
Mhm.
getting people involved, bringing in that kind of nonprofit volunteer aspect, but to companies and getting other people as excited about helping others as I am.
Okay. I'm going to stop you right there just to give an
Yeah.
example of how we would move forward from here. So you just came up with a line of work, a job title. I don't know exactly what the job title is, if it's literally called corporate philanthropy or whatever, like you'll find that exact title.
Mm-hmm.
Then I want you to do research on what it takes to do that work. What does that actually look like day to day? What are the biggest sacrifices and challenges around it? And then reflect on yourself for yourself. Have I done work that supports this? You may not have exactly done this. That's okay. We want to make the case though that your skills are transferable and also being able to see where are they not transferable? Where do you quite frankly have a gap perhaps that we can work on filling? So, do you have a sense off the bat of what that kind of role does? And if so, what have you done in the past that's similar?
Yeah, I think it, from what I've seen, the roles are all quite different. But yes, I have a sense of what some of them do, and I do think that a lot of my roles do have similarity and overlap. Funny enough, social work is never just one thing.
Mhm.
It's you never just do the one job you're supposed
Yeah.
to do, and it's never just clinical. In my current role, for example, I run our fundraising, I run our special events, I coordinate our family newsletter. So I handle all of this. I do all of our engagement and have in other organizations. I think a lot of these skills I have, it's just figuring out, do they transfer in this larger way, and how can I market that, and does it fit?
Mhm. So, a way that you would market it is you're going to get very concrete examples from people who do this job. And so, in a whole other podcast, I'll with either you or somebody else, we'll talk about networking. But let's just say you're able to get at least one or two people on a Zoom call, and you are getting from them the biggest challenges in doing this job and what they feel is really important to be excellent at it. So, you are hearing direct from them. Okay. Then I want you to reflect on in your life, so both professionally, but also outside of work, what are the closest examples you have to demonstrating at its core what this person has expressed to you? And then you follow a framework. I have a whole framework of how you tell the story, right? You set the scene, right? There's a context, why it mattered for the organization, the work that you did, how you did it, the impact it had quantified, but also what did you learn? How did you grow? And then how did that then lead you maybe to the next example in a cover letter? For example, you would tie them all together. I don't want to say it's as simple as that, but it sort of is because let's just say in this job, they identify to you 5 core capabilities in order to excel, not just the nice to have excelling, but like these are the real sticky problems we solve. And here's what's the real truth of what you're going to need to solve them. Now you're going to match that with your own examples, your case studies, and you're going to explicitly say, I did my research. I talked to people in this field. I understand on day one what the learning curve is going to look like. And let me assure you, it's minimal. And not only that, one of my core strengths is my ability to grow. And I think I've illustrated that quite well with my second example or whatever. Like I'm self motivated, self taught, right? You're going to have these examples really fleshed out. They're going to be in your LinkedIn. I think you should make a personal website. Just use Squarespace, easy template. If you've got images that you put, great, like a photograph, you and the team or whatever, or the kids, and you just bullet point it out. So it's all really clear, but it's working backwards from what you've heard from a real person about what it really takes to excel and to solve problems. So we're not speaking around this. We're not telling people, we're showing them. Does that all resonate?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense.
Cool. Cool. Okay, let's talk about research though for a quick second, because
Sure.
as again, if this was like a longer session and I would urge us to do multiple sessions and all of this. So anybody listening do know it's not 45 minutes and you figure it all out. This is the beginning of ongoing work. But let's talk about research real quickly, because folks may be listening or you may be thinking, okay, I just got some good stuff to get started, but what do I do with this? It's all about the people. Okay. So based off of everything that you detailed out, see if you can find a way to begin your research. So we'll start with a company, or we'll start with Googling corporate philanthropy, looking it up on LinkedIn. I just need us to find a person and or a company on LinkedIn that represents in some capacity what you would like to do. Then I want you to go down the rabbit hole of where did they used to work? Or if it's a company, who works there? And based off of who works there in the department that you're interested in, where did they used to work? So you're amassing a spreadsheet of people and companies who are all tangentially related to this new direction you want to go in. You're also going to look up competitor companies. So you've gone down the rabbit hole of this person. Where do they work now? Where did they used to work? Great. Google, what is a competitor company to this one? Now that you look them up, find somebody on the team that you'd be interested in connecting with. And I'm not saying to connect with them right now. This is more just you getting familiar with who are the players in this space that I might potentially want to move into. You can set up Google alerts for yourself for if there's going to be open jobs at those companies. But my goal would be to never have to apply cold and really just start developing relationships with the people who work at these companies. A straightforward way to do that, literally just follow them on LinkedIn. And when they post, comment on it or share it, or post on your LinkedIn. Here are 5 every week. Here are 3 people or 5 people in the corporate philanthropy space that are doing inspiring work. Check them out. That's a really straightforward way to network where you don't have to feel like you're bothering them, because you're not. In fact, you're helping them. You're celebrating them. You're getting them visibility.
Okay. So it's a lot of like reposting and talking about that on LinkedIn and sharing what people are doing.
Yeah, I would urge before you do that to get your LinkedIn in shape, which will be a whole other podcast episode, but to get your LinkedIn in shape so that when they're looking at your profile, it's representing you in the way that you would like to be represented today. So maybe for now, you're just looking up the various people as the potential for a path to go down, and then maybe give yourself 2 more paths to explore. Going back through the exercises we did together, you got to corporate philanthropy, but you also, I'm sure, could come up with at least 2 more paths. Maybe you even have them in your head right now.
Yeah. Okay.
And do the same thing of finding companies and people, because then you'll start to get a better sense just intuitively when you are looking at the way the company describes themselves, the kind of posts that this person is putting on LinkedIn, or when you look at their profile, their career paths. Again, if you're doing that practice of connecting to your intuition, you're going to start to feel like some area is just right for you. And you may not even be able to rationally explain it. You might be like, oh, I just have a gut feeling about this one, which is why I started today with, do you ever practice for connecting with that like inner supportive voice? And also, if you're deciding between various paths to go down, do a whole ideal day exercise where as you get more information about what it takes to do this work, really imagining yourself getting up in the morning, brushing your teeth, going into the office. Again, you haven't done it before, so you're not going to exactly be able to visualize it, but hopefully you've talked to enough people that you'll have a good sense. Does one day feel more intuitively aligned with you than another? And that's how you'll make a choice, but you're not quite there yet. I think you have a lot of good places to start, though. One last thing before I open it up to you to give me your feedback on how this resonated with you or where you need clarity. Another exercise to do, the lowest hanging fruit, so to speak, of making a transition for you, for anybody. What is going to be easiest for you is taking what you do now and doing it in a for-profit context. So you help kids, you help families. Where are for-profit places you could do that, right?
Mhm.
And you may have
Yeah.
already thought of this too. So a stepping stone, so this is really more of a
Yeah.
bridge opportunity, a stepping stone. So
Yeah.
you're going to essentially be doing really similar things to what you're doing now, but just in a little bit of a different setting. You're going to have the easier time getting hired, right? Because the learning curve is going to be minimal. People won't be
Yeah.
worried to take a quote chance on you in the same way, and it'll get you into the for profit. You'll start making more money,
Yeah.
or you'll be able to start building towards this next much larger leap that you'll eventually take. You've probably done some thinking about that already. So before you give me general kind of feedback, tell me based off of that question what you've considered.
Yeah, absolutely. I've thought about that, and especially trying to look even in these roles that are aligned with programs that are maybe looking for volunteer coordinators on this side, maybe on the nonprofit or large nonprofits that are talking about $1 million budgets that are looking for the volunteer coordinators. So it's similar, but it's on the nonprofit side of someone that's coordinating volunteers, but they have much bigger budgets. So it's still getting that similar kind of experience. But yeah, or looking into, again, more for profit. I know there's a company, Love Every,
Mhm.
that's a toy design company. So I've looked at some things through them. It's a similar background. I definitely put on alerts for their company just to see roles and things. So yeah, I'm trying to look into similar companies that might be aligned with the background. Is trying to figure out what roles though would
Mhm.
be the next leap.
Yeah. I mean, you identified project management as a thing, so would be looking for those roles. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned navigating complex systems. There's families, there's empathy, there's psychology. You have a lot of these clues, these threads that you can pull. So where you're looking at each of those threads as categories of companies or of kinds of work that you could do. So let that
Mhm.
be the beginning of the research, right? When I said amass a large spreadsheet of once you see a person or a company going down the rabbit hole of who works there, where do they used to work, what are those competitor companies, you're just starting to get more familiar with what's out there, and then see what's the information that you're missing. Is it a really like finite understanding of what the job entails, and then ask yourself, how do I go get the information I seek? So if it's I want to know what it takes to do this job because I don't really know, can you join a group? Can the person who runs the group, they run the group so that they can help people in that field. You want to get into that field. That's probably a good person to reach out to, right?
Mhm.
So just as you are coming up against, but I don't know the answer to this, then ask yourself, how can I find the answer?
Yeah. Okay.
So a lot of my process, as you might have noticed, is it's always taking one step deeper. It's like we're figuring one thing out. How do we just get to the core of it, get to the core of the strength, get to the core of the environment, the impact, the information we seek? And when we get to the core, we know we're making the right decision. And you're going to be able to tell the story, your story, the examples you provide are going to be more accurate because it speaks to the core of the thing.
Mhm.
Tell
Okay.
me how I did with you today because, like I said, my English was a little shaky since you were my third session. So I want to know what resonated, where you might need more clarity, if at
Yeah.
all, and what you're going to be taking with you moving forward.
Yeah. I think my head's spinning a little also after a long day, our first day back at school. So my head's spinning after a long day also. Yeah, I think trying to just understand like when you're making this kind of a pivot, like what's a typical timeline that people take for making this? I know that's probably broad, but what does that generally look like for people?
Listen, if you're really good at self-reflection work, then this is going to go a lot quicker. That being said, there is an element of time that you want to have in this because that's ensuring that you are making the right decisions. You have to let things sit for a little bit. So
Hmm.
if you're like, all right, project management feels right, and then you immediately jump on it, but you didn't let it sit, might not be right. Whereas if you reflected on it, you did some meditations every week, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait, why did I pick this one? Huh? Don't rush it, is what I'm saying. I think if you're methodical with what I offered you today, you really go through and answer each of those questions, and you'll watch the podcast. I can also send you the transcript of it and really analyze, all right, am I rock solid on all of the prompts that were given to me? Have I amassed a spreadsheet of really cool people and companies? Do I feel like I'm choosing maybe 1, 2, 3 directions of which I can create materials that fit each one of them. I've done the reflection on my case studies. I've written them out in a compelling way. I got feedback from Claire or coach or whatever that this is really bridging the gap of how to transfer my skills. And then also, by the way, and this is going to go faster, you might need to do some work that helps demonstrate that you can bridge the gap. So when you say corporate philanthropy, is there a way that you could even get involved with that now without being hired? I don't know. A random idea would be hosting a 10 episode limited series of a podcast on your LinkedIn where you interview people in corporate philanthropy.
Mm.
So it's a project that you gave yourself that allows you to network and also is a body of work that demonstrates that you've aligned yourself with this new direction. So that, again, you're not waiting for someone else to give you the job to flex the muscle that you want to show them that you can do this. So when you ask how long does this take, I don't want to put a timeline on it per se, because you might find that it comes together quite quickly when you're doing all of these prompts and you're starting to do the research of who's out there, how you're connected to them, you're getting involved in groups, you're commenting on LinkedIn. Hey, maybe something pops up and you have a lot of, you're like, dang, I have really good transferable examples to show, and you're able to quickly get this together. Who knows? Maybe it could be in like a month. I don't think so. I don't think it should take that short of a time. But is this going to have to be a year or 6 months? Not necessarily at all. So that's my non-answer. But in my mind, it's about being methodical. It's being strategic. It's having the checklist. So I actually, as part of my Ladies Get Hired program, I have a cohort that I do periodically for job seekers. I give a checklist of things. And because you can get overwhelmed, even just the long list can overwhelm you. But if you're like, all right, I'm dedicating this amount of time this week to doing these things, and you do them or you don't do them and give yourself some feedback on why that happened and how you can make it more easeful next time, it's a sustainable marathon for sure. It's a marathon that requires sustainable next steps for sure. But
Okay.
this is your life. So you don't you
Yeah.
want it to you want to dig in, get gritty with it. Don't
Yeah.
jump out of desperation for sure. And the
Yeah.
best place to begin, by the way, with pulling that thread of who's out there doing interesting things, or it's always starting with who used to work at your company, where did they go? And if there's anybody you can think of offhand that was able to pivot, talking to them, getting insight on how they did that. How did they demonstrate their transferable skills? Where did they go? Doesn't mean that what they do now has to be exactly what you want to do, but they have a similar story to yours. Maybe start there, reach out to them. I would say that that'll give you a better sense of the timeline it'll take.
Yeah. Okay. That's helpful.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, before I, let you go, just any final things you want to share of what resonated or not, or what you'll be doing in the next couple days off of this call.
Yeah. Just a lot of research, deep diving back into LinkedIn and trying to figure out some of these companies and saying, actually, I do have a quick question. Is LinkedIn like your best resource in terms of researching?
There's going to be lists too, it's like Forbes does like top X people, whatever, because at the end of the day, this is all about the people we work with and work for.
Right.
So that might actually be an interesting place to begin of what are conferences out there with speaker lists that are in the area that you're interested in, or those like top X number of people recognized by Forbes for cool company culture. Fast Company does that. So you could go find those lists anywhere where there's like a critical mass of people and companies would probably be a good place to begin as you're collecting a spreadsheet of research.
Okay. That sounds good.
And I think this is really exciting. It's like we want to rush the thing because we want to get to the next place, but actually the whole point of life, it's actually just this. It's the figuring it out that is life. So if you can try to find some enjoyment in this, some sort of celebrate and relish the process as you do it, that will help not only make it less painful, but maybe even fun because it's self-discovery. And what's the point of life if not to understand who we are so we can experience things better? And you're doing that through your career, but let this like illuminate lots of stuff for you. And maybe you'll have aha moments in other areas. And I just can't wait to hear what happens next.